All right, or 2 minutes after, I think I'll go ahead and get started just with the introductions here. So I think there's a lot to cover and make sure we get it all in. Okay, let me go. Okay, everyone can see the screen, right? Did it change? Yeah, all right. So my name is Kelly Hickler. I am one of the co-chairs of APA's Community Engagement Interest Group. And I think there might be some folks who are joining today who are outside of APA, maybe not familiar with APA. It's the American Planning Association. And also in the call, I see my co-chair, Chris Holler, who just joined, and his company is Conveo, which is powering our session today. My consulting practice is called Synovation Studio. And I'll go on here. So our interest group, we just started this last year, and we're up to over 500 members now, and we have over 800 followers on LinkedIn. Yay! The nice thing about being an interest group is that it's free. There's no cost to join it, and it's also open to everyone. You do not have to be an APA member to join the group. So, if you would like to join us, we'd love to have you. If you go to apacommunityengagement.org, there's a form to fill out where you will get added to our roster. You'll start receiving our newsletter, our monthly newsletter on Substack. You can also subscribe. You don't automatically get subscribed to our YouTube channel. So if you want to head to our YouTube channel, like this session and past sessions that we've done are on our YouTube channel and our website. We have a lot of resources available. We are a completely peer-driven organization. We rely on input from all of our members. So if you have resources to share, success stories to share, lessons learned to share, if you have ideas for future webinars like this, please let us know. Reach out to us, hello@apacommunityengagement.org, and we will look at getting your resources added. So today's call, we have Dr. Cassie Hemphill with us, who's going to be talking about the evolution of the IAP2 spectrum and specifically how it applies to planners, how city planners can make use of the spectrum. And Cassie and I, we were just chit-chatting before this started about how in my career I went through the fundamentals training in 2009, and I think it's changed a bit since then, but in that time I've seen the IAP2 spectrum be at least mentioned in a lot of different planning documents, community engagement documents. So I would say there's quite a few planners who have at least some familiarity with the spectrum, with the IAP2 organization. What I have seen is that it's not always applied consistently, that maybe there's some confusion, maybe it's a mystery to some folks about how to be applying it correctly. So Cassie and I thought, hey, this is a great opportunity for our organizations to collaborate and specifically share with planners or planning adjacent professionals how this can be used in the work that you're doing. So before I turn it over to Cassie, I have a poll to bring up. I just need to activate it here. Okay, can you see that on your screen? Thumbs up. Okay, cool. So yeah, none of these questions are required. This is just helpful information so we know who is on the call. You can either share your job title or just a short description of the type of work that you do, how often you're using the spectrum in your work. If you've done any training, even if you didn't complete the training, if you've done any sort of IAP2 training, and whether or not you're interested in additional training. Just give another second or two here till I stop seeing responses coming in. What do you see on your end? Do you see the results live or not yet? No, okay. All right, because I see things moving around. All right, last chance, submit your answers. All right, I'm gonna end the poll now. Okay, now I can share the results here. So let's start with the easy ones to analyze. Looks like, okay, 48% of people are using the spectrum regularly in their work. I think that's great to hear. But then that's interesting. The second biggest group is not at all. So, okay. Uh, okay, kind of a mix. So most people have not taken any IAP2 training, but it's encouraging to see that there is some people who have. Okay, I'm glad it's a very small percentage of people who said no, that they don't want any additional. I'm assuming that's the folks who are like experts already and are like, no, I've done all the training. I don't need any more. Let's see, what happens if I pop this open? Oh, this is cool. Okay, I can show a word cloud if I figure out. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that and I'm going to show this word cloud now. Okay, can you see that? Is that big enough? Do I need to zoom in? I don't know if I can zoom in. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay, so mostly planners, planning, associate. Okay. Cool. Well, at least Cassie, hopefully that's helpful to you to see kind of who's on the call, who you're talking to. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. I'll just be in the background. I'll be monitoring the chat. So, Cassie, thank you so much for being here with us and take it away.
You bet. You bet. Okay, so let's see. Let me share what I wanted to try and accomplish today. So, our goals, lots of questions about why we are doing this, what might change. And I just want to acknowledge we are in the midst of this project. No decisions have been made. We are analyzing data, and then we'll put forward a recommendation to the international board, and they are scheduled to take it up at their meeting at the end of this month. So we'll know after the end of July whether the spectrum will change or not. If it does, what it could mean for your work. And then we have that 30-minute session afterward for those who can stay on to explore and talk a little bit about how this might affect you and what might be some potential barriers that you would encounter. So let's start. Oh, and I need to acknowledge, hold on, I've got to move a couple things around on my screen here that got moved. I need to put in chat a shout out to my colleagues on this project, Dr. Tracy Ayon up in Canada, Luis Ore in Peru, and Tiffany Scomrow, who's our IAP2 International Project Manager. And practitioners around the globe, including the originators of the spectrum, one of whom is on the call with us today. So, okay, so here we have the famous spectrum of public participation. And if you would, take about 30 seconds and identify the single most useful thing on this slide for you and post your response in chat. The single most useful thing on this slide, which is the model. No right or wrong answers here, just interested in hearing from you all. So several people have mentioned the promise to the public, the differentiation, aligning our goal with the promise, the arrow showing the increasing impact. The idea it's a spectrum, right? A tool. Yeah, so great. Great. I agree with you with all of those. There are so many important things on this that it is it's a pretty dense model when you think about models. It's not simple. So let me stop sharing my screen. Let me just talk to you for a moment and tell you a little bit about why we're doing this. So the spectrum is arguably the IAP2's most widely recognized and used tool. It's been, and it still is, extraordinarily useful. But our practice, some people feel, have outgrown some of the original assumptions. So the first assumption was that people would learn how to apply it by taking IAP2 training. And as we saw in that poll, everybody has taken the training. And the reality is that it, and I'm sorry, somebody just mentioned lack of familiarity with IAP2. This is the International Association for Public Participation, which is a global nonprofit, much like APA is. It's a membership organization that was created by practitioners to support the practice and to share the goals that we have for public participation or community engagement. Okay, so IAP2. So the reality that we have encountered is that it's often used, the spectrum is often used without training or explanation. And that means the tool needs to work more clearly as a standalone resource. We need to assume people may not have the training. And if they don't, then how do they correctly interpret it and apply it? The second assumption is that it was originally written in English, and it reflects both English language and colonialist concepts and assumptions. And today, the spectrum is used across many languages and cultures and governance contexts. And some of those terms do not translate cleanly or carry the same meaning everywhere. Third, the original spectrum was designed largely for what I call traditional public engagement, the kind of public engagement I did when I first came into the practice 30 years ago. Where the decision maker both makes the decision and implements the action. Engagement practice has evolved. And now what we see more and more is that communities and partners and affected groups may help define the issues, may shape the options, co-design actions, implement solutions, or even hold authority in different ways. And so the fourth thing is that there's been some confusion and translation challenges. And some of those middle categories, the consult, involve, collaborate categories, may be trying to do too much work. So practitioners told us they wanted more distinction, more clarity around the differences, especially between involve and collaborate. We'll come back and look at this model here in a second as well. So 2 years ago, the international board, engaged in the current process to examine whether the spectrum as known and loved is still fit for purpose. This is not the first time the board has reviewed the spectrum. However, previously at the time just was not ripe for change. So during the current process, we've engaged in workshops and surveys and sandbox exercises and pulse checks and analyses. 3 themes emerged consistently. One was the need for language that is easier to understand and translate. The second was clearer distinctions between the different forms of public influence. And the third one was stronger alignment between public influence and decision maker commitment. So the question here is not whether the spectrum is valuable. It is. The question is, can we make it clearer, more accurate, and more useful for the way engagement is practiced today and into the future? So that brings us to what might change. Let me come back and show you again the current spectrum that we all know and love. Now, this is a version that was created by Canada, IAP2 Canada. We have these various standalone regions, and it has some icons on it. It's colorful, and people have said they really like it. Okay, so where might we be going? Let me do this instead. Let me change my screen to, and Kelly, if you would post that document in chat that I shared with you earlier. Okay. So what we're seeing on screen is one of the versions that is being currently considered. Okay. This is based on all of the engagement we've done, collecting input from folks, hearing where folks thought there needed to be some changes, what they wanted to keep the same. And Kelly is going to post in chat a link to the document. Maybe you already did. You already did. So if you can't read this on screen, open it up on your own device. Okay. Thanks, Kelly. Okay. So if you have questions along the way, post them in chat. Let me try and get through some of what I have prepared for you to discuss. And then hopefully we'll have some time to answer some of your questions. Okay, so key proposed shift is how we are treating inform. So the inform level, sharing information, is absolutely necessary for meaningful engagement. But it is not itself engagement because the public has no influence over the decision. Inform is about sharing information. It's the decision maker or whoever is in charge sharing information out with the public to raise awareness for educational purposes, maybe generate awareness of the engagement process that's going to be taking place, even starting to recruit participants. I always like to think of it, probably because I'm a former comm professor, is one-way outbound communication, right? We're deciding what to communicate, how to communicate, what channels to use, and what to include. Engagement, in contrast, is about gathering input, learning from people and communities, or inviting influence. They both matter, but they're not the same thing. One of our originators, and I'm going to post a definition. What you see on the slide is, I'm going to post that in chat too. So one of our originators describes the spectrum like a dial, more a dial than a ladder by intention, right? They looked at Sherry Arnstein's ladder, and we're not going up. We want to see it horizontally. And when you think of a dial, think of 1 to 100. Okay, 1 is no influence over the decision. That's informed. 100, the public or community decides. For most of us in our democracies, that's voting, right? But there are other ways that the public or community could make the decision. Most engagement is somewhere between. So this helps separate two really important questions. Are we sharing information, or are we inviting influence? And so in this model that you're looking at on screen, sharing information, we've pulled it down and around. So it's a U shape to remind us that we share information before we start engaging. We share information all the way through engagement, no matter what other degree of influence we're using. And we share information after the engagement, when the decision is made. And then I always suggest continuing to share information as long as that project implementation is taking place. Okay, so that's the big proposed change. Okay, now let's go to providing input. When we're thinking about providing input, this one's really the closest to what many people have understood as consult, but the language is intentionally more direct. The public provides feedback for consideration or reacts, but decision makers retain full authority and responsibility for the outcome. Our participants throughout our engagement have said they really strongly supported retaining this distinct input-focused degree because it reflects not just a very common form of engagement, but for many of you that work for agencies, this is where 99% of your engagement takes place, is at this providing input level. Right? Why are we not using the word consult? Because the word consult in many countries is a legal and regulatory requirement. For instance, in Canada, they must consult the First Nations. And so it creates confusion when you use a word like consult, and the First Nations say, we're already being consulted, but it's not. Our consultation is more at the old collaborate level than it is at the what we used to see as that providing input level. So that's one of the reasons why people around the world have said that word consult does not work in our context. And remember, IAP2 is an international organization. So we have to think in terms of multiple languages. How does this translate into Finnish? How does this translate into Bahasa, the official language in Indonesia, right? So, and how does it translate into non-colonialist or post-colonialist contexts, right? So we're really trying to maintain that global perspective. Okay, so the next three levels encompass, involve, and collaborate. And again, these are proposals. Nothing is set in stone yet, okay? What people told us is involve and collaborate. Actually, there's like three different distinct degrees of influence in here, okay? So I'm going to post all three of these definitions in chat so you can see them and read them more easily. So exploring together, the idea here is that the decision maker understands the issue differently because they engaged in dialogue with the public. So this is what we used to call in training, bringing people together, right? Where you bring people together and they start talking. And as they talk, not only do they learn, but importantly, the decision maker is getting some insights as well, insights that they may not have had previously. And one of the major themes throughout our engagement was that dialogue-based processes are fundamentally different than simply gathering feedback, right? So participants described situations where people were exploring trade-offs, assumptions, concerns, possibilities, doing it together in ways that shape how the decision maker understood the issue. In designing together, the key ideas here is that we are shaping the options or solutions together, right? And participants identified an important distinction between dialogue at that exploring together degree and actually helping shape the criteria, the alternatives, the designs or solutions. Oftentimes, we've been calling this collaborate, right? But in this degree, so the public is not just discussing ideas, but they're actively contributing to what's being developed. Now, the decision maker still retains the authority, but the public has a substantive role in shaping what is being considered. Okay, now let's move to deciding together. And the key idea here is that we share responsibility for the decision or recommendation. We, as in the decision maker, shares responsibility with the public, co-equal in I guess you could say. So again, participants told us during our engagement that some processes involve joint responsibility for making or recommending decisions. And so this degree reflects those situations where the decision makers and publics are working together in shared processes, sharing responsibilities, sharing constraints. Okay, so those are those three middle levels. Now, on the far right, we have what on the slide says delegating authority. We're still getting feedback and considering the feedback we've gotten on how this is named. Really, I would like to think about it in terms of the public decides, because delegating authority is still the decision maker has all the power and control, and well, I'll let you make this decision. It feels sort of patriarchal still, right? So here, when we're talking about the public deciding, the key idea is that this decision maker really is stepping back or stepping out of that decision space or the decision circle. And has the authority has been delegated within a defined scope, okay? Although this is less common, participants strongly supported retaining this degree because it reflects real practice and clearly communicates situations where decision-making authority genuinely rests with the public or a community-based body. Here in the US, we have very few examples of this. Our nonprofits are usually organized with an elected board. Even our cooperatives usually have an elected board. There are a few that don't. The Park Slope Co-op in New York City is a great example of a member-driven, member-decided co-op. There is no elected board. All the members get together to make those decisions. Let me just tell you, it's really slow. I belong to a co-op in Missoula that was based on the same principles. It took us forever to make decisions. You have to be really slow and thoughtful and accept that. The other example that some of you may be familiar with is friends groups, the Quakers, where everyone has decision-making authority. And some of our New England townships still have this kind of authority. So you might be asking, well, why did we move away from the word empower? Well, empower is another one of those problematic words. For instance, in South Africa, in the Constitution, everyone is empowered. The entire public is empowered. So when you do a public engagement in South Africa and you say, and we're going to work with you at the empower level, they say, well, we're already empowered. What do you mean? Right? So again, we're really mapping out our global context and trying to identify where words are creating particular problems for our practitioners. Okay, so what changes are we seeing here? I've talked about the U shape and how sharing information, you have to do it at every degree, but in itself, it's not engagement. We don't have the arrow on here. I'm one of those, I will just tell you. Double-ended arrows suggest that they continue going in perpetuity in both directions. Well, you would need some endpoints on those arrows. And where do you put the endpoints, right? So instead, we substituted or proposing to substitute the words less influence and more influence. Now, the arrow may come back. We'll see. The other big thing that we have done here is we have relabeled these items as influence and commitment. Now, the goal is still there, and the goal is defined. We actually have a companion resource or user guide that will accompany the spectrum. So it's the additional information you need to interpret it correctly. But our practitioner, the people who engaged with us, our participants, said influence needs to be up at the top, right? The public needs to know what influence they have. And so influence and commitment are basically two sides of a coin. Influence is from the public's perspective. The commitment is from the decision maker's perspective. Okay, and we tried to frame these as really as a binary. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was the icons up at the top. So a lot of people said they like icons because it's an accessibility measure. Not everybody has the same literacy we do. Not everybody speaks the same language we do. And so by having icons, we're communicating information in a different way to reach a broader public. So we have two sets of icons that we are still playing around with. The set that you're looking at on the screen is basically dots and connectors. And the square is the decision maker. And you notice the decision maker on the left side where the public has less influence. The decision maker square is bigger And then as you move to the right, it gets smaller. And then when you get to delegating authority, it moves out of the decision space entirely. Okay. So each one of these is meant to represent the concept of the label. Exploring together, there's interaction, but the decision maker is still at the center. Designing together, we're working together to shape. Deciding together, the decision maker is part of the circle. And delegating authority, the decision maker is outside the circle and the public is making the decision. The other version that we have has more traditional icons. And what we're finding is there's like a 50-50 split. Some people love the dots and connectors. Some people love the traditional icons. So our iconography, again, we're still evolving this. A checklist of some sort or a written comments for providing input, dialogue bubbles, designing together, deciding, bringing those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, and delegating authority, turning over the key, saying you've got the key to the decision. So let me come back to the chat. And actually, before I do that, let me ask you a question, and then I'm going to ask Kelly to share what are some of the questions that have come up in chat, because I have not been watching chat while I've been talking. Let me first ask you in chat, which of these degrees feel most familiar from your own practice or organizational context? Type one or more numbers. 1 for providing input, 2 for exploring together, 3 for designing together, 4 deciding together, and 5 for delegating authority. Yeah. And while you are typing those numbers in, let me just say, this is not about changing how we engage the public. It's simply about, can we be clearer and more honest about the kind of influence, the degree of influence that is being offered to the public. So let me check in with Kelly. I've got one more piece that I want to bring, but let's talk about this. Let's spend maybe 5 minutes answering any questions that came up. Kelly?
Yeah, let's see. So I can kind of scroll back through here and see if there's anything in the beginning that wasn't answered already. Okay, there was some discussion about, oh, now I can't find it. The origins of the spectrum and its relation to, now I can't find the link. Oh, here. There's something, the spectrum of community engagement to ownership.
Yeah.
Are you
That's
familiar with that?
great. I am. It's a great spectrum. It was developed to really show from the community perspective. So remember that the IAP2 spectrum has always been from the decision maker's perspective. It's what we use when we sit down with a decision maker and we walk them through the spectrum and help them decide what level or levels, because sometimes there's more than one level, where they want to engage the public, what they're willing to commit to, what promise they're willing to make. We've sort of backed away from the word promise because of its legal implications, and some of our practitioners have said, yeah, that's a problematic word. Every word is going to be problematic, let me just say. So coming back to Wendy's question about the spectrum of community engagement, great spectrum. It may be that IAP2 will need to develop a companion to the spectrum, to the IAP2 spectrum, to recognize the community's perspective. So right now, I would say it's useful to use both. Certainly, I do, depending on the kind of work that I'm doing. What
Okay.
other questions?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, that was one. Um, and I think you did briefly touch on the difference between the IAP2 Spectrum and Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation that we all learned in planning school.
Right, right. And as Lewis points out, and Lewis is one of the originators of both IAP2 and the spectrum, that the IAP2 spectrum was developed for a different purpose, right? Oh, I will just say one of the challenges that I often encounter with practitioners is they assume that you should move to the right. And one of the problems with the ladder is, we always want to climb to the next level up. Well, the spectrum is not like that. The spectrum is like a menu of options. It's just like when you go into a restaurant, you get to choose, do I want a dessert today? Do I want an appetizer? Do I want soup and salad? The spectrum is like that. You have this menu of options to choose from. I say you, really, it's your decision maker, because as practitioners, we can make recommendations, but ultimately the practitioner needs to make that commitment. And so it has to be a commitment that they can live with. What that means is sometimes we might come to our decision maker and say, we really think you should be working at looking at this new model, deciding together. And the practitioner or the decision maker may go, oh no, that's really scary. I don't want to do that. So we back down levels until we find a level where the decision maker is comfortable making that commitment. It's an opportunity for education, recognizing this is a long-term project. It may take some decision makers a short time to trust the public more. Some decision makers, it may take them a longer time, right? Okay.
All right. There's a few other questions. Do you want to go through those or do you want to come back? Basically, there's some folks we are unclear about some of the language, the difference between explore together and
Mm-hmm.
design
Mm-hmm.
together. Maybe that sounds kind of similar.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit and why the reasoning why those words were chosen or
Well, yeah. Well, I will just admit, English has very few words, and we tend to reuse those words for a lot of different purposes, and that creates some problems. Um, we originally had proposed for that middle level using co-design. Um, and a lot of people pushed back on that and didn't like the co-design. So we said designing together. Well, in our last round of engagement, some folks said, what about shaping together? And I personally like that. Now, I'm not here speaking on behalf of the project team, but I'm certainly going to say, could we use shaping together rather than designing together? As planners, though, I would bet that designing together or co-design probably resonates with a lot of you. Exploring together is more about the dialogue process, right? There have been times in my practice where a decision maker has come out with some ideas about the project they want to do, and it wasn't until they sat down with the people who would be impacted by the project that they started learning some things that they had never thought about before. And in the process of learning and having that dialogue, exploring the contours of the project together, all of a sudden, that project actually shifted to a new place as a result of that dialogue. Now, some people might argue, well, you can still get that by providing input. But, the reality is when you write or type, um, you don't communicate as much as when you speak or draw. And so there's some constraints. And so oftentimes it's only through dialogue as I hear what you're saying, you're listening to what I'm saying, a third person says, well, I'm seeing a connection here. And so it's through dialogue oftentimes that we are developing better ideas, right? It's why we went through all of these engagements for this Spectrum Evolution project. Our practitioners are what they told us, what they showed us, the illustrations that they drew really propelled our thinking forward, and result in a much better product or a much better recommendation at the end.
All
But
right.
that
Thanks.
said, let me
Yeah.
just follow that up by saying we're still trying to figure this out ourselves, right? We're not settled yet on these words for this very reason. They're a little unclear and fuzzy still.
Okay. Thanks for shedding some light on that. There's a few more questions in the chat, but I also want to be respectful of, any additional presentation materials that you want to go through. So, what would you prefer, Cassie? Do you want to keep going through questions? Do you have more that you want to
Yeah,
share?
let me take just a couple of minutes to sort of come back to where we began at the beginning of this, which was what could this mean for you? Okay. And I understand that after this hour, there'll be 30 minutes where you can explore this more. But for those who have to leave at the top of the hour, your organization, if an evolved spectrum is adopted, and let me just say, we're using the word evolution, not revolution. We're not throwing out the spectrum. That's never been the intention. It's can we take the spectrum that we already have and love and use and evolve it? Are there opportunities for improvement? So your organizations will have to decide whether and how to adopt if there is an evolved spectrum. But the deeper issue, I think, is whether your language, your practices, and the decision maker commitments are aligned, right? The biggest implication may not be the labels themselves. It may be the discipline of matching the degree of public influence to the decision maker's actual commitment. So organizations are going to respond in different ways. Some of them might want to change the public facing language. For some of you, it may be about internal planning and decision making, staff training or templates, evaluation, accountability. The most important question for each of you and the work you do in the organization you work for is not simply, do we change the model? It's, does our current language accurately describe the influence that the public has in our decisions? And so actually, let me just post this in chat. If we were to adopt something that looked like this, what would your organization most need to revisit? Is it the language, the training, the templates, your evaluation processes or practices? Yeah, what might you need to, or maybe you're not sure yet. Yeah, if you could just post a letter in chat. I'm trying to make it simple for you. Or letters, as the case may be. Yeah. What would your organization most need to revisit? So I will say, I think the big barrier is going to be that clarity that inform is not engagement. because so many of our decision makers believe that if they are informing the public, that is the same as gathering input that can influence the decision. And by moving the sharing information away from that 0 to 100 dial, putting it down below, it more clearly signals or communicates that inform is necessary, absolutely necessary for meaningful engagement, but in and of itself, it's not engagement. So that pretty much wraps up what I was going to say. So let me turn it over to Kelly. We still have about 8 minutes left. What would you like to do with the remaining time?
Yeah, let me see if there's any questions that were outstanding in the chat. So you did cover about why sharing information is on the bottom. Okay, there's a question about in the deciding together column, why the fourth puzzle piece in the graphic there doesn't fit with the others.
Yeah,
I'm getting,
yeah.
I don't know if that's intentional or
So our graphic designers, IAP2 International has a contract with graphic designers in Kosovo, actually. And as you know, if you have ever worked with a graphic designer, the words that we convey sometimes don't quite show up in the graphics that come back. We're still working on that graphic. That comment that it sounds like you would prefer to have that fourth piece locked in, that's good input. And I'll take it back to the project team. Yeah. If there's other things that you see on there that you're like, don't like this, let us know. Again, I will tell you that some of the people that have looked at this, about 50% say, I like the dots and connectors, and the other 50% say, no, no, icons all the way. So what we're probably going to do, if this is accepted, is provide both options and let you choose which option is most meaningful for you and your community.
now maybe you already covered this. Is IAP2 still accepting input?
So the survey has closed.
Okay.
We have a ton of input, and we are in the process of doing the interpreting and meaning making, because we have to have information to the board in about 10 days. We've got a lot of work to do between now and then. But it's always useful to hear your input. There's some question about whether there might be a testing period if the board does decide to move forward. So if you have input, feel free to send it my way, and I will put my contact information in chat. And I know some of you already know me. I recognize many of the names here on in this webinar. But please reach out to me if you have questions or suggestions for improvement.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cassie. See, there's a question from Lewis, or comment about that what is missing is the introduction at the top. But maybe did the old one have an introduction at the top?
It did. It had a couple of
Yeah.
lines, and we still have that. It's up on, let me flip through page 2 of that PDF that Kelly posted in chat, has a purpose statement. Again, we're still tweaking the words, trying to figure out the right amount of information. We've added a second sentence because a lot of people think IAP2 is only the spectrum. They have no idea we have this whole suite of frameworks and models and principles and practices. And so we want to position the spectrum as one piece of this larger set of or suite
Mhm.
of information available.
Okay. Let's see. Then there's another question from Rachel. If you could give an example of different engagement methods from explore versus design. And I don't know if we want to do that now, or maybe we want to bump that into our little 30-minute exercise. What do you think?
Rachel, would that be okay if I don't know if you can stick around for another 30 minutes?
Trying to get off mute. Let's see.
You're
Okay,
there.
we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me. Ha. Yeah, that works fine.
Okay,
Okay,
awesome.
perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Let's see. Okay, recording. Okay, yeah, I put a link. We'll be sharing the recording on our YouTube. I put the link in there. So I think, oh, wait. Oh, I missed some. There's new things at the bottom here. Okay. Chelsea, I noticed that the spectrum refers to the public in the singular. Many cities and counties use the public or the community without a way to clearly communicate inequitable barriers to participation. Is there any consideration for evolving the language on the spectrum to reflect the presence of multiple publics that have different levels of engagement with decision makers?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion there. I will tell you it's even more complex because rights holders, Indigenous peoples, don't consider themselves the public. And so when we use the word the public, we're conflating a whole lot of different groups. And that's something that we're really grappling with right now is how do we finesse this? Yeah. So
Okay, so we're at 59. So maybe we'll kind of wrap it up for those who need to jump off. And then for those who are able to stay, we would love to have everyone who is able to stay and do this 30-minute activity where you can apply the spectrum to some planning scenarios. But if you can't stay, we understand, no hurt feelings. So thank you for everyone who joined us. We hope that you took away some valuable information. If you're not familiar with the spectrum before this, at least now you're introduced to it. If you were familiar with it, you've learned about some of the proposed changes and like Cassie said, you can email her with any additional questions, suggestions that you have. And we'll be continuing the conversation, I think, after this webinar even, maybe, future collaboration opportunities between the two organizations. So thank you for those of you who have joined us, and we'll see you later if you need to jump off. And for those who are able to stay, we can, I think, continue to answer some of the additional questions, or we can get right into the activity. So what do you think, Cassie? Should we? I'm just scrolling through here to see if there's any major questions that weren't answered. Okay. Okay, so Lewis, whoops, I scrolled too far. Oh, Lewis asked, who will see the proposed final version before the board decides?
the board. And it's not a proposed final version. We are providing a recommendation to the board. And I know that seems like semantics, but it really is. It's just a recommendation. What the board does with it is up to them. They're the elected representatives of the membership, and they may kick it back to us. They may tell us they only like parts of it. They may say, nah, thanks for the work. We're not going to do anything. I have no idea. It's completely up to the board what they decide to do.
All right. And see, Dakota has their hand raised. You can unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I didn't want to just interject. Um, I kind of had a question there that probably got buried because I also like tied it to a comment. And I apologize if I missed this in the original presentation, but because I really like the change of removing inform and kind of creating that U bucket underneath. But could you remind me if I missed it, kind of sticking to like the 5 categories, or if there's like a lot of overlap
Mm,
there
mm,
where maybe it could have just been like 4 categories and kind of keeping those same buckets that we had, but not using the specific
yeah.
like consult, collaborate word. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a question that's not resolved yet. It's something we're still thinking deeply about. There are uh, reasons why we would want 5 categories instead of 4. And it's because the human brain works in groups of 3, 5, and 7. 4 is an odd number. Um, and our brain doesn't really function as well with groups of 4 as it does with 3 or 5. 3 felt too limiting, too constraining. 5, we're all familiar with having a 5. Really, if we can't uh, clearly differentiate those 3 middle levels, exploring, designing, and deciding, then it probably will come down to 4. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate that feedback. And like I said, I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. Just yeah, appreciate the kind of background or some of the thought that's going into the design. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Should,
Well, I think
should we
that we got
answer
about, oh yes,
should
did
we
we
answer
miss,
Rachel's question?
oh, did I miss a question? Okay, yes.
Rachel's question. Rachel, would you ask your question again? I've sort of lost it here.
Yes, I think I am still trying to differentiate like explore versus design. And I think part of my challenge as I'm thinking of it is like in practice, there's a it feels like sequential to me at times,
Mm,
but then um I'm also like sensing the differences in the former, right, like engagement spectrum. And so I would love if there's like different, if there's an example of 2 different methods, one of which maybe you would use in explore, one of which you would use in design.
yeah. So I guess the simplest example would be exploring together might be a community conversation, a neighborhood group where they're just talking amongst themselves. Sometimes we might do like a dialogue forum can be done at exploring together where they're just trying to really understand what the problem is and talking about it and discussing it. Um, and then whatever input comes out of there would go to your decision maker. Whereas designing together is more like, okay, let's roll up our sleeves, let's do a design charrette, let's put all the blocks in place, let's figure out what we want this to look like. It might even be, I know you do a lot of strategic planning work. That might be the designing together stage where you're actually figuring out, okay, where do we want to be in 3 years or 5 years or whatever the time frame is. We used to have methods on the spectrum at one point in time, and they got taken off. That was one of the changes that was made many years ago because it was too constraining. People thought, oh, this is the method I have to use at this level. And a lot of methods can be shaped for different circumstances. And so we didn't want to have that be a constraint. Also, because there is a limited amount of room on one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So we want to make sure that every piece of information on there is absolutely necessary so we don't reduce point sizes so that it's inaccessible. That was a lot more than you asked.
No, that's great. Thanks, Cassie.
You bet.
All right, Cassie, do you want to jump into or activity. And then please, if I missed anyone's question in the chat, we're a small enough group now. You can just you just ask your question.
Yeah. So I guess my question to you, to all of you, is would you be able to adopt this evolved spectrum? And if not, are there pieces that you might be able to adopt? That's really, I think, would be an opportunity for a really rich discussion about how would you apply this? What would have to change in your organization? And what barriers would you encounter? And Kelly, we could either break into some breakouts or we could do this. There's not that many folks. We could do this in a home group. If folks are willing to maybe share and then listen to what others have to say.
Well, maybe I can just start with kind of an observation of everything. Using the spectrum and the engagement, for the past, I don't know, 10 or so years, it is that you don't have a small task. I think for me, the challenge that I see is that, we're talking about this in a planning context. So you're making a lot of references. There's indigenous peoples, there's people in Africa. Things mean different things to other people. And my brain's been kind of wrapping around, well, there are the kind of fundamentals of what the spectrum does. And there's almost adaptations for each individual groups, so for me, the essentials are here. But then when I'm talking to mostly city council members or planning commissions, and it's in the planning realm, to me, the language that is in the current spectrum relates more effectively to what I need to talk to them about in the decision making. Well, some of the stuff is still here. To me, the inform I get from the engagement perspective when you're actually engaging. Informing isn't engaging, but to me, some ways it's not the conversation engaging, but it is making sure you're committing to bringing forth information to the community, which is engaging them in some way, but it's not engaging them in a dialogue that shapes. So I kind of struggle with it a little bit because there are things where like, hey, a new park is going here and this is what it is. You want to make sure people are informed and aware of it so that if they want to come to the council meetings and protest in some way, they can do that, right? But sometimes there are reasons that the end, I don't know. So I'm trying to wrap my head around all the details. I really appreciate you walking through how and the whys of all of this. And I think for me, it's more of the implementation part. Back to your question, can you implement it? Because this to me is broad. It brings back the here's what we're doing, we're exploring together, we're designing together, but really gets down to that level of commitment in the what the decision makers are doing. Like this is what they're committing to, which then affects what kind of budget they want to put in, what types of tools they want to use. So I'm trying to wrap my head around the difference between the two because the sharing of information, I do agree, is you're doing that across the board. That's just kind of a given. You just do that. And this visually to me is a little bit harder because I was looking at the kind of inner you of the influence, commitment, less influence, that I didn't see the sharing of information like a hug around it eventually, originally. So maybe that's more of a graphic thing, or it's like up at the top, it's just a consistent, bar across the top. You're sharing information across the whole thing. Because I did look at it as it's like down here and kind of a secondary thing versus you have to do this across the whole board. So those are just some of my initial observations of the whole thing. You do not have an easy task. I mean, we've all been there when everybody has one word or it means something different. And so, I almost want to think, I was starting to think it's like, are there different, like almost like not chapters, but it breaks it down into different if you're talking to this group of people, this means this. And if you're talking to this group of people, this means this. So that you're not stuck trying to get that one word that works for everybody, but it still has the same intent. So that's my brain down from listening to everything. I don't know what it all means yet. It's not like, concrete feedback of like, here's the thing, but it's just some insights from my perspective implementing in a planning realm.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think all of us are going to, if a new spectrum is adopted, we're all going to have to sit with it for a period of time. It may be weeks, it may be months. For some of us, it may be a few years before we're really able to figure out how to weave it in. Yeah. Who else would like to share? Is your organization, do you see them adopting that, or do you see some other barriers to it?
I could speak at this city of Bloomington. We do use this P2 spectrum, and I could see. Um, well, I like the move of commitment and influence. I could see maybe some council members hesitating to want to go back to the promise because it's a little less uh, what's the word, like a little more non-committal for them than maybe, but I understand the point of it, right, is to like have better accountability to the decision makers. But even with that, with them being the decision makers, like that's where maybe some of the discomfort um, will come from. And so the where maybe they would still want to like frame it as the like promise to the public to kind of help set the expectation for public, but I think overall, like we would still get there and could use this new model, but maybe sometimes instead of saying influence or something, they might want to still stick to the like promise to the public.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I also want to acknowledge that, IAP2 has this big challenge in that we're a global organization. We would like to produce a spectrum like we have had for the last, 30 years, that is a single global spectrum. But each region within IAP2 is going to have the option of doing a bit of adaptation. So what you would see is the same no matter where you are in the world, but there'll be additional context and certainly translation to adapt it to the regional context or realities. And of course, many of your organizations are already doing this, right? I've seen spectrums out there that instead of 5 levels, there's 4 levels. I've seen spectrums that are shown as a circle rather than in a linear format like this one. We've seen pyramids. We've seen all these different adaptations that fit the needs of the organization, right? And so oftentimes I think probably what I see the most is the empower level, and sometimes the collaborate get trimmed off and they only have the first 3 levels on their spectrum because that's all their organization can do because of the regulatory or legal environment. Kelly, how about you? What sorts of barriers do you see or opportunities do you see with this?
Hmm. Um, yeah, that's a great question. I was just agreeing with what you were saying about the empower is the most commonly cut off level. Sometimes collaborate, it's cut off. I'm wondering if with this will we still continue to see that happening? I'm curious if it will, if that trend will continue to happen. Um, I actually see this as an opportunity to, this is a good excuse basically to reintroduce the spectrum to organizations who have not adopted it or are not using it, who are not familiar with it. This is a great opportunity to be like, hey, check this out, and you should be using this, and this is how it could be useful for you. Um, and I'm just thinking too, kind of like along the lines of what Wendy was saying, if there's an opportunity for perhaps APA and IAP2 to collaborate on to like some plug and play modules or something, that like companion resources that go together about, hey, here's the reality of how a lot of cities are using this, and how they could use the updated spectrum, and here's some more specific guidance for cities, for city planning departments, on how to use it. And when you're thinking of the different audiences and how they're using it, I see opportunities for
Cool.
for this. Yeah. And this is being like a launch pad for some conversations that could be really fruitful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Sometimes we get so focused into the project that we fail to see, okay, there are opportunities out there. I'm really glad you brought those out. Mike has mentioned in chat here, the depth of information beyond project-specific details is crucial. Informing about processes and rules is much less common, but can help community members both in and beyond the immediate context. Yeah. And choices about what information to share aren't neutral, even if intent is good. And this is really important, right? This is what distinguishes our work as P2 practitioners or engagement practitioners. And by the way, I use those terms interchangeably. They arose in different contexts and different countries. This idea of community engagement versus public participation. IAP2 did a long engagement over it and decided, they're basically synonyms. So sometimes I use P2, public participation. Sometimes I use engagement. More and more, I think we're seeing people use engagement like this interest group does. But what's important is we need to distinguish what we do in this practice and differentiate it from public relations, public outreach, communications. Those are all really important and necessary to us being able to do meaningful engagement, but they have different purposes and different outlooks. And public relations folks, especially those who wear both hats, public participation and public relations, they really have a challenge, because am I trying to spin the information, or am I trying to be transparent, or, as I always say, open up the closet door and let all of the skeletons fall out, which is what we do in community engagement, public participation. Yeah. So, Mike, would you be willing to turn on your microphone? I don't know if you're in a place where you can turn on your microphone and share more about this preaching to the choir that you have mentioned in chat.
Oh, well, this is my first time joining one of y'all's sessions. I just assume, since you're authoring this framework, that, I'm not pointing out anything new to you all, but I would like to be able to point to certain kinds of language to, like other folks have said, to decision makers, to kind of reflect that this isn't just one man's hobby horse that this is, something that's ingrained in best practice.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're here talking with practitioners, and you're the ones that then have to carry the message to the decision makers, and the decision makers don't always want to hear it. Especially if someone's been elected or appointed to a position and they have spent, a good part of their life, their career, getting to that position of, I'm going to just say, power and control. It's really hard for them to let go of some of that power and control. It takes a very confident person to be willing, and someone who has a great deal of humility and curiosity, I think, to be able to relinquish some of the power and control that our institutions give them. Yeah. Yes, Chelsea says, advocating up is so hard. Oh, it's very difficult. Yeah. Any other questions or comments that come to mind? We haven't heard from a few of you, and I would love to just get a reaction either in chat or if you're willing to turn on your microphone, share what you're thinking, how this is landing for you right now. And I'll just post that question in chat. How is this landing for you?
I actually have a question in regards to, I guess, like more training offered through IAP2. Once the spectrum has been finalized, will there be, I guess, like a new, like, let's say foundations, like to public participation, or just other classes that like can get people more caught up to speed and get people more familiar with the new spectrum?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked, because that's really important. How are people going to learn about this new spectrum, and what are we going to offer? What we're talking about doing is, if it's adopted, whatever is adopted, there will probably be a video, on-demand video that people can watch that explains how to use it, what it is, what's changed. But certainly there'll also be opportunities for workshops. I'm already thinking that I'll invite folks to come to a workshop where we can talk some more about it, because a lot out of a video, but sometimes you have a question that's not answered by that video, right? So yeah, so that's what we're thinking. Would that work for you? Give me a reaction if that sounds like it might work.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you,
Awesome.
Cassie.
You bet. You bet. Yeah, a lot to be done. Even if the board accepts this, then we still have a lot to do. And Dakota mentions in chat, open to changes, but like you mentioned, it'll take some time to digest and understand. Yeah. Having a supplemental document that gives examples of each new aspect of the spectrum would be helpful in understanding the differences. Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm just gotta give a promo for our classes. In our applying methods class, we introduce 40, 50 different methods that we can use, and give you a matrix, a database where you can filter it and figure out, okay, if I'm going to be at this level or this degree of influence, what are some of the methods that might work best for a large group, a small group, high emotion, conflict, right? So just gotta, promote our classes. Yeah, because we have lots of choices to make. Absolutely. Well, Kelly, let me turn it back to you to close us out. And thank you so much for this opportunity. I have just really appreciated being able to bring this work and get this input from folks who maybe haven't seen this before or haven't been engaged in the process, and hearing your feedback and getting your responses. I much appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cassie. As far as I know, this is the first collaboration between our two organizations. I don't know, that might not be true, but I'm not aware of any major collaborations or webinars between the two groups. So this is a great first step, and like I said, what a great excuse with the proposed changes to reintroduce this and start some new conversations between different groups. So I really appreciate you, Cassie, taking the time to talk to our group today. And like you said, there's a lot of information. It's a lot to digest. So I'm sure that we'll need some supplemental resources and trainings for folks. But yeah, and thank you to those of you stayed to the end. We appreciate you, and hopefully, this is a valuable activity for you. Please reach out to us. I know Cassie put her email in the chat. You can email the interest group hello@apacommunityengagement.org as well if you have additional questions, suggestions, etc. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.